Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Hilary Stupa, and I am a developer with Qdabra software. Let me just take a quick look here and make sure. Yep, looks like my screen's sharing and my audio's working. If it's not, be sure to drop a question in the question bar so that I know about it. At any rate, today what I want to talk to you about is, again, kind of a Power Apps 101. Let's take a look at Power Apps. And today I want to look at it through the eyes of an InfoPath developer. So we're taking it kind of from the standpoint of Power Apps versus InfoPath, okay? But before we get started, if you haven't tried FormsViewer, this is my shameless FormsViewer plug. Power Apps is going to be fantastic for you for new things you are developing, but I'm sure a lot of us already have a pretty big investment in InfoPath. And FormsViewer, either on premises or in Office 365, can give you the ability to extend the life cycle of those forms that you've already spent time and effort on. So you definitely want to check it out. We are adding features all the time. The publishing experience is much better. You just kind of drag and drop things, and that's super nice. So why throw out all the work you've already done when you can keep that investment rolling? And I also today want to introduce somebody new to you. We have someone new at Qdabra. Her name is Sherry Reesberg. This is her first week with us. She's originally from Iowa, but she's lived in Arizona for 15 years. She has 12 years of experience. Whoa, look at me flip through the slides. Wait, let me get back. I was trying to scroll my notes. I hope I didn't give away any surprises. And she has 12 years of experience working in SharePoint, and she started working on SharePoint 2003. She's done a lot of workflows in SharePoint Designer. She's brand new to Power Apps and Flow, just like a lot of us are. So she's kind of starting at that same point we are. And she's just been working through my recent Power Apps and Flow training this past week. So without further ado, Sherry, would you like to say hello?
Okay, did I unmute?
You
Has it
did. You're a
happened?
rock star. You're an unmuting rock star.
Yeah, this is my fourth day, and that's yes, do a webinar right away. I am excited to be here, though. I'm excited to start, and I don't have much InfoPath experience or Flow or Power Apps experience to speak of, but the training is, here's a shameless plug for that. The training's been fantastic, and what is really good about it is that it has a lot of, I'm finding the labs are really hands-on, and they're complete explanations, and it's really good for me because the experience is minimal on that. Although, you know, SharePoint isn't a new concept, workflow isn't a new concept. I have plenty of PowerShell-ish, you know, experience, but it's been really positive and good, and I definitely recommend the class, and I get the pleasure of taking it and getting paid to do it, which is awesome.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Sherry. So yeah, you guys, we're putting this class on again, hopefully starting December 4th. That's our goal right now. So if you are interested in the Power Apps and Flow class, definitely check it out. Last time, I know the labs were a lot for folks. We really kept them busy. There's a lot of content, and you get to walk away with something you've built. And so I know for me, when I take training, I'm always a little disappointed when I come out of it and it's like, oh, I've built something entirely useless. But I think everybody's familiar with the concept of an expense report, and I think everyone can get some value from that. So at any rate, check it out if you've got the training budget and the time. Moving on, let's get started with today's webinar. So here's a representation of our agenda today. We're going to talk about InfoPath versus Power Apps, and I felt like King Kong versus Godzilla was a great way to kind of introduce it. And Elmel helped me with the graphic, so this was a team effort. And what I'd like to do is run this quick little poll. I'm curious right now what the first version of InfoPath was that you tried. Now, I started I started with InfoPath in 2003. I was one of those people that I just sort of found it on my computer, right? They installed Office, and I'm like, hey, what's this? And there is a form out there somewhere with terribly named fields, terribly named groups, sections that didn't need to be there. Yeah, I think we all have some of those. So I've got some raging humiliations in terms of old work. But that's when I started using it. And then I see quite a few people also started using it in 2007. And in 2003 and 2007, we still had those sample forms in there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those as compared to what we've got in PowerApps. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll so we can move on. But yeah, it looks like we've got 43% in 2007, just 14% started in 2003, 32% in 2010, and 11% in 2013. So it looks like 2007 and 2010 were the big adoption years, and I can understand why, especially within 2010, the ability to customize list forms. So at any rate, moving forward, let's talk about what is PowerApps. If you've been to one of my PowerApps webinars before, you have seen this slide. It's just kind of a basic, what is it? Software as a service creates mobile applications. It is really focused on mobile right now. You only have the two layouts. You've got phone and tablet. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward here. However, it is intended to be a rapid application development platform. So the idea here is they want to give you something where you can build an app fast. And if you kind of keep that in mind as you look at it and work with it, you'll get more of a sense of why certain decisions or design decisions were made. It's intended to help you get something up and running fast. Now, can you make something complex? Oh, you betcha. But in terms of your fast, simple app, like you just need for people to be able to easily do something in a list on their phone and it needs some quick rules, PowerApps would be a fast way to do that. It doesn't have any code behind. We leverage Flow for that type of thing. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but I just kind of want to give you a heads up as to what it is, just in case you're not familiar with it yet. Okay, so here we go. First off, samples. I mentioned that. Remember 2003 and 2007? Folks who started using InfoPath in 2010, I'm so sorry, but they didn't give you the same level of love they did us back when we were baby InfoPath developers. And in 2003 especially, there was a lot of highlighting of these sample templates. There was an expense report. There were some other things. They had a lot of JavaScript in them and were probably more complicated than they needed to be just because the people who developed them wanted to make sure we understood what was going on. But they were a great way to kind of learn about InfoPath, to kind of get your feet underneath you, right? And they helped us learn kind of general concepts. Well, not surprisingly, there's a similar thing with PowerApps. They have some sample templates created, and you can use those to customize to create your own thing of this nature, or you can use it as a getting to know you. You can use it to learn. Let me pop up the one. I've lost my web browser. Oh dear, I found it. You'll be pleased to hear I found my web browser. Let me drag Chrome over. I tend to use, okay, so I'm not a Chrome girl. I'm sorry, I apologize in advance for being like so deeply enmeshed in the Microsoft ecosystem. But you all know with InfoPath, everything works best when you're using Internet Explorer as your default browser. And so I was always Internet Explorer, and then I kind of have been using Edge. But I am finding that for certain design things with Flow and PowerApps, Chrome has worked best for me. So if you're getting frustrated trying PowerApps and you're using Edge or Internet Explorer, perhaps try Chrome. And I don't have a good way to describe the difference, but I do know like in Edge, when I'm working on a flow, stuff can be kind of squirrely. It's kind of hard to get a hold of things or click where I mean to or type where I mean to. It's like stuff is moving. It's like there's a moving target. And in Chrome, it behaves itself. So at any rate, I created this just from the, let's just say, use new hardware. Um, what is that about? I created this from the template that's available. So if you go to Power Apps and you see where it says make apps like these, start from blank, start from data, you can see we've got these samples down here, and you can select these different things and start from them to get a sense. So I just created this one from the site inspection. And this gives you a chance to kind of look at things. What are the things in here? What are the artifacts? What do these different things do? So if we go and we look at the selected gallery, or if we look at this gallery, which is the other one, we can look at the icon, and okay, so on select, that doesn't do anything. That's really nifty. We could look at our delete button, see what it does on select. So it gives us a chance to click through and kind of see what's happening. Okay. I notice there's a question asking people to mute, but I think if I look at the attendee list, I think everybody is muted except for me. So it could just be an issue on your end, because if anybody else is having an audio issue, pop that into the questions area for me so I know about it. So at any rate, check out these samples. It gives you a great opportunity to first off see some pretty things, which I usually find inspiring, and to second off see how they're doing layout, how they're doing logic, because I feel as if these are good ways to learn. Keep in mind, Power Apps is changing a lot. Okay, so they're adding features and so on. So some of these samples, the approaches may be a little out of date already, but at the same point in time, they are a good place to start. So definitely check those out, just like you would have with InfoPath. So as far as samples go, we've got them. They're a good way to learn. InfoPath, customizing lists versus Power Apps from list. So in a modern list, you have the ability now under Power Apps to create an app, and there's the little flow button there too. If your list is in classic view, you will not see these things. Okay, so that's just something to be aware of. And right this instant, we don't really take over the list the way we do with InfoPath. In InfoPath, we would customize the forms, and those forms sort of own the list. So if somebody clicked new in the list menu, it opened up my form. And if somebody clicked edit on the item in the list, it opened up my form. And so we don't really have that here in Power Apps. And as I say that, it changed. So right as I'm telling you this, right, these things are changing. And I found out yesterday when I got a notification on the new features from the Power Apps blog. So you want to keep kind of an eye on these announcements here at powerapps.microsoft.com. And they just said, announcing availability of custom forms. Multi-value choice and attachment support is also exciting, even though attachment support is only read-only at this moment. But you can see they're stating here that they've rolled out a new feature that it appears, from what I can see, is much more like what we were doing when we were using InfoPath to customize our list. So you definitely want to check this out. And I'm going to paste this link into chat so that we have it here in case anybody wants to go check this out. Now, it sounds like it is being rolled out gradually. Let me make sure I send this to the entire audience. It's being rolled out gradually. So if we go here to where it talks about it a little bit more, you can see it's being rolled out in stages. If you don't see the option, you'll see it soon. And if it contains data types that Power Apps doesn't support, the option might not be available. Hey, does everybody remember this from when we were trying to create database-bound InfoPath forms and we realized all of a sudden, oh, I can't submit this because of some SQL data types? But, deep breath, I'm sure everything's coming, right? But at any rate, so as I was putting this slide together yesterday, Power Apps turned me into a liar again, so I was super excited about that. But at any rate, it's good to know that this functionality is coming, and so this integration will be more complete in the future. It's just a matter of being a little patient. Now, generating an app from a list is another super way to kind of get a sense of, what these apps look like. Here's an auto-generated app, and it's just, in the list, you click that you want to generate the app, and it creates this for you. It creates what it calls a 3-screen app. It's always for your phone. So it's always a phone layout. It doesn't create in tablet layout. I'm assuming this customized forms functionality that's being rolled out is more robust and gives you more leeway. So what you get is you get a browse screen with built-in search, refresh, sorting. The plus button takes you to an edit screen. The edit screen is used for editing existing items and creating new items. This is a great way to learn more about how the forms control works, right? So if we click on plus here, we can see it's popping open a new form of edit form. If we click on the details screen and we click on the edit button here, we can see it's opening an edit form version of the edit form. That's the mode. So these are the kinds of things you can learn just by exploring these auto-generated apps. I like auto-generated apps for kind of a baseline for getting started, but they only do that from data in your phone view. If you're working on a tablet app, you're going to have to start from blank. And so that's just worth, or from one of the sample templates. I should clarify that. So keep those things in mind as you get started thinking about what you're going to design and how you're going to do it. So speaking of, forms from data, right? With InfoPath, when we create a database-bound form, I'm sure we've all tried these, right? You can only create from Access or SQL. You can add fields to the schema, but remember, they don't go inside that repeating group. If you want them inside the repeating group, you have to actually add them to your base layer data source, your underlying data source. And it doesn't support all data types, which, we all know, and we've learned this in terribly painful manners. But it did submit to a database, and for a lot of us, that was filling our niche at the time. It filled our needs. With Power Apps, you can easily add a bunch of data sources to submit to. And I was talking to a client just the other day who was still thinking in InfoPath terms as we were talking through what he needed. And when he realized he could submit to multiple lists from a single Power App, it really sort of opened up the doors to his thinking in terms of what could be done. So I want to make sure everybody here is aware of this. It's a big difference between the two. So I could create my Power App and I can easily submit to multiple lists. I can submit to a flow from a button. I can submit data to an Excel file on OneDrive or Dropbox. Just about any of these data sources you can connect to, you can submit to. Do you need to have some knowledge about how to do that? Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're using a form control, it submits back to the data source it's bound to. And then you can throw in a patch function or an update function or an update if function. So you can learn some of these functions reviewing some of the sample apps. Some of the sample apps are submitting basically to spreadsheets, but that doesn't mean that the underlying logic wouldn't be the same if your data source was something different. Okay, so keep that in mind. So that Power Apps, it creates a 3-screen app, and I want to show you, I bounce around a lot. It makes more sense to me to show you guys these things as I'm talking about them rather than, here we're going to do a demo at the end after you've forgotten all these little details. So I want to show you currently what the experience is like. And I've got to tell you on my tenant, right? Because now they're saying they're rolling out some new functionality. So it may be different very soon. Currently, when you create a Power App using that Power Apps drop-down, create an app, we won't talk about that whole make it private, make it public thing. This is what you get, right, when it creates this view. And so this is not very exciting. It's not very useful. It does give me an edit button since I am an owner of this app. If you were just a random user, you could use the app. You wouldn't see that button. And it gives you a quick way to open it. So I suppose if your concern was making sure that people only access this list via your Power App, you would set this as your default view, lock down or remove other views, and just force them into this situation where when they're at the list, they have to open from it. Again, I think that situation is improving. Let me click next here. Guys, I always take up too much of your time. Okay, repeating tables. So InfoPath repeating tables, we all know what they are. Obviously, it's super simple in InfoPath to store that parent-child data as long as you're sticking it all in the XML, right? As long as you're saving that XML file out from your form. We all know that that's extremely difficult to report on, and that's why Qdabra created DBXL, was to basically get your data into SQL so it's easier to report on. And that's one of the reasons we created Q rules, was to get that repeating data into SharePoint lists easily. So again, it really comes down to reporting in terms of that repeating data. It's so hard to work with. In Power Apps, we have galleries. So with a gallery control, we were looking at a couple galleries in that sample app, and in a gallery control, you can display repeating data. Then when the user clicks on an item, you could open a display screen for that data. You could give them another button if they wanted to edit it. And then you can save that data back. The way you decide to save that data back is going to depend on your design, and you want to think about that, because there's some complexity to parent-child data. You guys know this. And there's some complexity in an application when we start thinking about what we're going to let the user do. So, for example, if we want to let them cancel changes, we need to make sure that whatever we're doing with this child data, we can clean up if they cancel. So do we really want to submit child data until they hit save, or do we want to go back and delete child items that got saved and then they canceled? And so you want to kind of keep some of these things in mind so you don't end up with little orphans running around in your data stores. You just want to think about it. But again, patch, update, update if. These are the functions you want to think about. When you get these slides, guys, on this slide is a link to information about a bug. So with child data, I tend to like to put it in what's called a collection. Think of a collection as an in-memory data set, because that's what it is, right? So we kind of temporarily store it. Oh, let's remember this collection of data. And so what I like to do with child data is stick it in a collection, and then when the user confirms, yes, I want to save this whole mess of changes I've made, parent and children, then I submit the collection data to the data source. And there's a little issue with SharePoint lists. If you create a collection off of them and there's any blank values, that field doesn't exist. So if you're messing around with this, be sure when you get the slide deck, check this slide, because there's a URL there that explains the issue a little better. And that's a place where you'll want to use update or update if instead of patch. Okay, so just a warning. InfoPath, we have views. PowerApps, we have screens. There's a similarity here. We can see the same data in multiple views or screens, so it's not as if that's completely different. InfoPath, we switch views. PowerApps, we use the navigate function. In PowerApps, we've got this cool pane that shows you all the controls on a screen. We don't really have anything at all comparative in InfoPath. I've seen people compare the tree view, the like data source field view in InfoPath to this, and I don't believe they're comparative at all, because obviously the tree view in InfoPath, over here, this is data. These are data fields. That's a completely different animal than these, which are controls. So you can click through, and anything you click will be selected. It's definitely useful to be able to access all of these items quickly and easily, especially if you have logic in place that might be hiding one from you. You can always find it over here in your screens pane, and we just don't really have an equivalent. The controls. Okay, so InfoPath, we know they stopped development in 2013. So it's not a big crushing surprise to us to learn that the controls in InfoPath here they didn't extend as far as we would have liked them, right? They're pretty simplistic. They are basic data capture controls, and that's fine. They've served our needs well. But in Power Apps, we have a number of controls here that are especially helpful when we're talking about mobile. For example, for media, you can use a camera so that they can go and take a picture. You can capture audio should you need to for an app of yours. There's controls here that are meant to be friendlier to mobile use, especially like a toggle and a slider. So keep those in mind as you're looking at stuff. Are there cases where a toggle will work better for you than a checkbox, right? So there are these new, more modern controls that are going to be more useful to you in a mobile application. And also, we can group controls. So I encourage you to try that. If you have a label and a checkbox, for example, you can group those two controls and you can add your on-select action to both of them. So let's just say when they check the checkbox, you want a new section to show, right? That's not too far out of the realm of reality. And so you have a section where you want to display it if the user checks a checkbox. If you group the checkbox and the label, you could add your logic to the on select for the group. And now all of a sudden your user can be a little sloppy. They've got a little more room to select that. If they hit the label when they mean to hit the checkbox, it gives them a bigger touch area. So I just wanted to mention that. And then there's on select available for most controls. So on select is your action rule. Okay, so in InfoPath we have action rules and they do something. And in PowerApps, it's on select, and just about everything has on select available. So that means when the user touches stuff, you can do stuff. Isn't that a nice simplification? But it's really, I've found that really refreshing that I can put an on select on a label. Maybe I want it so when the user pushes on this label, it changes screens or it populates another value or any of those things. Those can all be run just from about any control. PowerApps has form controls. I encourage you to look into these. There's edit and display forms. You will see those in use in the sample apps, especially in the auto-generated stuff that comes from a SharePoint list. Form controls are a quick and easy way to edit, and update and create new data. So you want to leverage form controls where you can. They have what's called data cards on them. A data card contains controls within it. Let me just see if I can find my taskbar again. You guys, I'm sorry, I struggle so with this. Okay, so let's go look at a form. So if we look at a form, this form has these various data cards in it. Let me bump up let me bump it up a little less. Okay, so here's a data card, and you can see the card has a name and the card has controls within it. What's nice is these little groupings stay together, so you can just draggy, droppy them around, and you don't have to move things individually. I guess you could think of that sort of like a section in InfoPath, except for it is more confined. It's confined to this specific data field. But forms and data cards are going to give you a this is funny. Okay, so here's apparently I meant to tell you about forms and I didn't update my slide. So I'll update that before I send these to you. So any rate, what I meant to tell you about forms is they've got different modes. There's display forms and edit forms. Let me go back over to the actual forms so you can see them. There's display forms and edit forms, and they aren't interchangeable. So when you go and you decide to add a form, you've got a choice of edit and display. And display is always going to be read-only. So you won't be able to copy a display form and turn it into an edit form. You can't do that. However, you can set an edit forms mode to be view only. So if you had an edit form where in certain scenarios you wanted people not to be able to make changes, you can do that. So those are just things worth knowing about. I want to talk about naming in PowerApps. I mentioned that I have some forms of shame in my history that have field names like, field 1, field 2. And I see we've got a question about an example of the parent-child setup, and I will show you that at the end of this because I do have some stuff. So I've griped at everybody for years now about naming. Give your fields valuable names, give your buttons in InfoPath usually, especially if you're going to write code. If you're going to write code on your buttons in InfoPath, please give them a name so that when we look at the code, we can understand them. And I am going to now tell you that, look, a lot of these objects, renaming them is just an exercise in futility. How many of these objects are you going to rename if you create an auto-generated app, or when you're working on an app and you're creating, like, you add a rectangle to make it into a little separator? Are we going to name every object? And I think you're going to be very busy if you try to name every object. I would suggest that you rename objects that you're likely to use in formulas. So if you have stuff that you're going to be using in formulas a lot, I would say rename those if the name's too generic, if you're having trouble kind of finding the thing that you need to use. Maybe the first time you go and you say, oh, I need to use data card value 59 in a formula, that's the time to say, I'm going to rename that to employee name value or something like that. And then going forward, if you need it in a formula, you're going to have it named nicely. I kind of like the PowerApps naming convention that includes the object type. And you've heard me over the years be like, I don't understand why anybody's including the data type in their field names in InfoPath. And I don't. I mean, in InfoPath, it never made sense to me when people included the data type in the field name, because it was right there. You could show it right there in the fields task pane if you wanted to see the data type. But in this case, because of some of the functionality here, it makes sense to go ahead and keep that object name in there. And that's because sometimes I may just want to find, all the forms that are in my app, or maybe I just want to see all the screens that are in my app, or all the icons. Icons are like buttons, but there's sometimes some other things. So maybe I just want to see all of my buttons. So because of this search functionality, I would recommend being consistent. And in this sense, being consistent may mean following along with these default names in an auto-generated app and adding to them. So I've gotten in the habit now that if I create a new screen, I include the word screen in the name. If I create a new form, I include the word form in the name. And I just feel as if that's going to be helpful to me over the long run. But you do want to be consistent. So whatever you pick, you got to stick with it. And if you're working with other people doing design, have the conversation and say, hey, what's our naming convention going to be? Let's try this, and then stick with it. If you need to change it, change it. But develop some protocols amongst yourself. And I'm not going to, I'm never going to tell you this or that's a best practice. But I am going to tell you that in 2 years, when you go to a different position and somebody else comes into your position and you are trying to hand off this work you've done, you are going to feel so much better about it when you can tell them, and here's the naming convention we used. Okay, so future you is going to thank past you, and so will anybody else who has to work on these things. Moving on, rules. Okay, so in InfoPath, our rules are all grouped together. At least they are now, right? They weren't in 2003 and 2007. We had to go looking for our formatting rules and our validation rules and so forth. But when they developed the rules pane in 2010, they put good thought into that. And we have all of our rules kind of grouped together, and it can be extremely useful. PowerApps, there's a rule builder now. And guess what, guys? They let you rename your rules now, so I'm super pleased about that. But the rule builder is mainly around grouping actions, and we'll take a quick look at that. And so it's not really similar to the task pane. Action rules from InfoPath are very much like a function in PowerApps. You'll see those in the formula bar. Validation rules from InfoPath, the custom validation rules we have in InfoPath, like this last little shruggy, that's just kind of snarkasm. But the thing is they don't really have that. Right now, PowerApps is leveraging your underlying data source for validation. I did see a couple of neat blog posts about validation, or one at least, so do check the slides. There's a URL in this one that you can go take a look at. And forms do have a valid property. So before you submit a form, if you're using form controls, you can check and see if it's valid just by .valid. I mean, it's as easy peasy as it could be. So there is validation. Your users can get validation errors, but we don't have the same kind of custom validation where you can be like, well, if company is equal to A and vendor is equal to B, then delivery date has to be equal to C, right? We don't We don't have that. So it's something to watch for. I think it's something that's going to improve. It's just not there yet. Um, Code. Let's talk about code. So InfoPath, at least 2010 and, well, I think 2007, 2003, we had that script editor. I don't want to talk about that. That was a long time ago, and it hurts me to think about. But in 2010 and 2013, 2010 they had the little integrated dev environment, Visual Studio tools for applications. Then they changed it again in 2013 and said, no, now you have to use Visual Studio 2012 because we haven't confused you enough. If you had somebody write code for your form and then they left the company and nobody knew where the source code was, you had to use a decompiler to figure out what was going on, which is why I have one installed on my machine, because we get forms from clients where they're like, I don't know if it has code, and then you find the code DLL and you're like, well, I wonder what the code does, and somebody's written 6,000 lines of code behind this thing and you got to figure out what it's doing. So no more decompiling code. PowerApps doesn't have code. What you can do in PowerApps is on a button, you can execute a flow. And so it's got that nice integration with Microsoft Flow. Microsoft Flow is pretty powerful. Again, it's another thing that's getting added to all the time. So you can execute a flow from your Power App. Just the sheer quantity of data connections you can add to your Power App means that a lot of the things that you might want to do that you might in the past have written code for, you can pretty much do from your app using just built-in functionality. But if you need to, you can run a flow. And you can also, of course, set a flow on your list or library or whatever the thing is that you submit to. They even have flow triggers now for SQL. So you can definitely extend things with flow. Preview. I wonder if anybody can guess why I have that nice picture of a bug next to the InfoPath. And you guys know I'm not harshing on InfoPath. I love InfoPath. I do. It's had my heart for years. But the problem with InfoPath preview and browser was that we would have these variances. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, where we would be like, oh, I previewed it. It looks great. It works great. And you publish it to the browser. And all of a sudden you end up with this nightmare, right? Because you're not really previewing in the browser. So now you have to make sure you've got your dev environment and your production environment, because you've got to publish this form somewhere to try it out. And then the next thing you know, you end up with problems with your promoted properties and they're all blank in your production library because the GUIDs in the manifest got changed when you published to dev. And it's just, I mean, it's been hard, right? Because you can't tell how the form's going to work in the browser. Yeah, you really can't. With Power Apps, we're really pretty close to what you see is what you get when you preview your Power App. You just kind of run it. You've got lots of choices as to when you're going to publish it, so you can just it runs from the screen you're on, folks. So, if you're not on the start screen, like I just showed you there, it's not going to run from that screen. So keep that in mind. Runs from the screen you're at. But you can see that as you look at it here, this is going to be very similar to what you see when it's published and users are using it. 95%. Okay, so the things you're not going to be able to see here when you preview is behavior of input parameters, because you can add URL parameters to your Power Apps URL and then consume them from within the app. Okay, so you can't see those, obviously. You'd have to actually publish it and try that. And the other thing you can't see sometimes is your on start action. And this bites me all the time because for some reason, my brain will not hold this information. So your first screen will have the on start action. It doesn't really belong to the first to the screen necessarily. It just always belongs to the first screen. And when you add a new on start action, if you just go and run your form in preview, it's not going to, your app in preview, it's not going to execute. You need to actually save, close, and reopen your app, because what happens is when you open your app in design mode is when that on start action executes when you're designing. When it's published, it executes the minute you open it. So just if you take away nothing else, just kind of keep in mind that on start and input parameters, URL parameters, are the two little gotchas as far as this preview goes, okay? And so be careful of that. The other thing that is absolutely wonderful about PowerApps is you can execute your actions in design mode. So you can see that this is, we're just here in design mode, and here's my plus icon. And you see how that cursor turned into a hand? So I can actually execute that button by clicking it twice. So you click it once, it turns into a hand, you can click it again. Or if I wanted to, I could type some text in here. So keep in mind that you don't necessarily have to preview to try things, okay? Next, publishing and sharing. You know about InfoPath publishing. You don't need me to tell you about it. PowerApps publishing. You can choose who you're going to share it with, and you can choose what their permissions are. The permissions are pretty simplistic. You can either use it or you can edit it. Okay, so you can select that 3 people are also able to edit this and that everybody else can use it. You can roll back to a previous version. You can see this screenshot right here. You can just hit restore to go back to a previous version, and you can decide when you're ready to publish something. You can have like the live version here and then 6 or 7 more versions after it because you've been working on it. Okay, so you don't have to publish until you're ready, which is a good improvement. Anybody try PowerApps when it first started, right? And it was like always live. It was the most terrifying high wire act ever, and that's why it took me 2 years to fall in love with it. It took that long for them to get it developed enough that I wasn't terrified, right? And so again, with saving in versions, every time you save your app, a version's created, and actually they introduced an autosave, which you can turn off, but you can't set the time on. Last I checked, guys, they may have made a liar of me by now, but last I checked, it was every 2 minutes it was saving, and that can create a lot of versions if it's auto-saving that often. You can delete old versions. There's a comment field here, but there's no place to make a comment yet. I've got my fingers crossed that's coming. So, all right. This is the one hold on. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to hit Q&A, and I'm going to show you a parent-child just so we've got it, because we've got a question about seeing a parent-child set up. I see we've got, does Flow still have limits to how many can be submitted? I am not sure what the current limits on Flow are. I haven't hit a limit for a while. I haven't seen any clients hit a limit for a while. So I'm going to assume that flow limits, like so much in Office 365, are probably subscription dependent. Definitely something worth looking into if you've got concerns about limits. I know once or twice when I was testing something, I ran into a block on the send mail action. I was using the send grid send mail action instead of like an Outlook or an Office 365 send mail, and I hit a wall there. So keep that in mind. We have a question about if you roll back versions, what happens to the one rolled from? So what happens in versioning, let's just you guys, how do I always use up your whole hour? I'm always like going into these, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be so fast and we're going to be through this in no time, and these guys are going to be amazed because they're going to be back at work before they know it. And then, here I am, like using up your whole hour again. So here we go. We've got this expense report application. And if we go look at my versions, so this is my live version right now. And if I were to say that I wanted to restore this version, 167, it's going to end up being version 170. So we'll go ahead and say restore, and it's going to be saved as version 170. So here comes my new version, I hope. There it is. Okay, and so as you can see, my new version is not published. All I've done is roll it back. If I want to publish it, I'm going to have to do that. If I hit edit, I'm going to be editing version 170. If I hit restore to this published one, it's going to become version 171. Okay, so that's just kind of something to keep in mind in terms of versioning. As with everything, as I told you, I've hounded you for so long on this with InfoPath and other things. Build a test. When you're trying something new and you're a little concerned about what the behavior might be, go ahead, put together a super fast test app, put together a test list, throw a test app on top of it, publish it up, and then see what happens when you roll back a version. Right? So go ahead and experiment a little to get more comfortable. If we edit this, and this is for you, Michael, when you're asking about a brief example of the parent-child setup, look, people are going to take different approaches to this, okay? And so I just want to clarify that up front. My big concern with parent-child has always been allowing the user to cancel and get rid of everything. So let's just pretend I start a new expense report and it's got child line items. If I want to write my child line items, I need to know my parent ID. If I need a parent ID, I need to have submitted the parent. So if the user clicks plus and starts a new expense report, fills out parent information, and then adds child items and then cancel it, how am I going to handle for that? Your options are you could submit as you go along, but then what happens if somebody wants to cancel and they've made edits to child items? If you've submitted all along, how do you undo those edits? Can you go back and delete them? What if it's an edit to an existing report with existing child items? So I talk myself into these little boxes where I'm just like, no, we can't submit anything until the user's all done with everything. And that's just my approach. I've seen other people's samples with some parent-child stuff where they just merrily submit along and really you put the user in a position where they can't cancel. And where they can't cancel out everything. They could cancel an individual action, but they can't be like, 2 steps further and then cancel. And I think that's okay and valid as well. I just think it's something that you need to think about when you get going. Okay, so here's here's an expense report that I've got going on. And from the detail, let's see, where am I at here? Let's find out where I am. I'm trying to think of which of these. Oh, I think this one probably has items, right? So this guy has some child items to it. And so if I hit my edit button here for my expense report, I'm still just using galleries. Okay, so this is just a gallery that has child items from my child list. So if I go, this is the wrong place. If I go to the wrong place long enough to look like I know what I'm doing, here's my child item. Okay, and so you can see my items here are my expense line items. This is actually a collection that I loaded up when I selected this in the gallery. So back here in the gallery, when I selected, I've got a clear collect. I'm creating an expense line items collection. I'm getting my expense report items based on report ID. Okay, so I'm using collections for this. Again, you may want to use direct connections to your child data. I like a collection. So this line item gallery has only the children that belong to this parent, right? And then when I click on this guy, it takes me into the edit form for the item itself, and I can save changes or I can cancel changes. Because I'm using a collection, if I'm back here on my edit screen, if I cancel this, I can go ahead and not submit the changes. So no big deal. My changes are in a collection. When I re-enter this screen, I'll have my new collection loaded up because I used clear collect from the browse gallery, and it's just not an issue. When I save this, all you can see here is submit form, edit form. That's because I'm not going to submit my child items unless my form submits successfully. So over here on edit form, you can see we've got on failure, on reset, on success. Here's where I'm going to submit my child items. Don't let this terrify you. So submitting my child items is in this case, I'm still using patch here. Oh, that's right, I restored my old version. My latest version is using update if. So I've still got patch in place here, and I've got some stuff going on where I'm executing an email, where I'm sending an email. So there's some other stuff going on down in here. But basically, I'm using patch for this. What I'll do, you guys, is I've got an export of this expense report with its flows, and I'll just include that with the PowerPoint. So fill out the survey and Karu will send out the email afterwards with a link to the recording, and I'll include this so you guys can take a look at it if you want to. And again, this is just one approach. There are other approaches. You will see in these sample Power Apps, especially if you go and try out, the one I learned a lot from was this budget tracker. So check out this budget tracker sample app. It's a good one for kind of seeing and understanding some parent-child stuff. You'll want to take a look at that one. Finally, the one last thing that I hadn't really talked about yet that I want to mention briefly, keep in mind layout. With InfoPath, we could have a mobile-sized screen and a tablet-sized screen and a full-size screen all in the same form, and we can't do that here. Okay, we've got tablet, we've got phone. Are they going to do something that's more desktop size? I don't know. Are they thinking that this customized forms in SharePoint is kind of going to fill that niche? Maybe. I'm not sure because not everything's going to be from SharePoint, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. If you're working with people who are mainly using their desktop machine, you'll probably want to go with tablet. Can they switch to a phone view when they're on their phone? No, you get to build it twice. Can you copy it and save it as a different layout? No, you get to build it twice. These, these are things that I find as an InfoPath developer to be a little annoying still, as you can tell. I'm going to let you guys go because I've got a 9 o'clock meeting. But thanks so much for attending. I had another poll that I totally forgot to give you. So we're going to try that real quick. I'll just launch it super quick. If you get a chance to answer this poll on to whether or not you've tried Power Apps, I was curious about that. I just forgot to ask. And do fill out the survey afterwards, and we will get you these materials. I promise I will fix my slides before I send them to you, so there's actually information about forms on the forms slide. And I will get you an export of this expense report application that I've used for training and so forth. And that way you've got something else you can look at. But I do encourage you to try out the sample templates with Power Apps. And thank you so much for attending. It was wonderful seeing you all. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. Bye.